Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a truly fascinating stack of papers you've provided, left behind by a remarkable character named Benham, all filtered through the thoughtful perspective of his friend White, who serves as the editor of these notes.
It's um it's definitely not a standard biography, is it? Or even a finished philosophical work. It's
Yeah.
more like digging through the raw material of a life. A
Exactly.
life dedicated really to answering some incredibly difficult questions about what it means to live well, to live honorably in a world that, well, often feels messy and chaotic.
Absolutely. And our mission for this deep dive is to try and extract the key insights from Benham's lifelong quest. It was a journey, sometimes brilliant, sometimes pretty chaotic, but always driving towards understanding how to find meaning and purpose when surrounded by complexity.
Yeah, and you can really see Benham grappling with big universal stuff here. Fundamental fears, the search for true purpose, the complicated reality relationships, and also how to be effective and well-informed in the real world, not just like in theory.
We have such a rich mix of sources in this stack, his personal reflections, arguments for his evolving philosophy, and these really vivid stories from his travels and relationships, all curated by White, looking back on his friend's life.
So think of us as guides, maybe,
Hmm.
helping you navigate these papers to uncover what White felt was most important about Benham's uh, research magnificent.
Okay, sounds good. Let's jump in and start unpacking this incredible material.
Hmm.
So, White, looking back at Benham's papers, he really frames this journey for us. He notes a toughness of mind, a kind of intellectual hardihood in Benham from a very young age.
Yes, and right away, White highlights that Benham's early struggles with fear weren't just, typical childhood jitters. They were profound, almost elemental battles he was fighting internally.
You really see it in these vivid childhood memories recorded in the papers. There's the sheer terror of the tiger seeing its size in a cramped cage, the contempt of its detestable indifference. He was just terrified.
And that experience was so powerful, the fear apparently haunted him for years. He saw it everywhere, turning dark patches or even furniture like like ottomans into sources of dread.
And then there's the fear of the stallion, hearing that brutal story of a laborer killed by one, described in gruesome detail.
Yeah, this filled Benham with shame and horror, as Waite puts it, and led to this lifelong physical aversion, his heart literally stopping sometimes when he saw horses galloping. Just a visceral reaction.
And it wasn't just physical threats either, was it? There was this different kind of fear, a giddiness and insecurity in unstable high places. His dreams were apparently filled with precipices, falling, clinging by his nails to nothingness.
Which brings us to a truly pivotal moment, White recounts, facing that fear head-on at the Biss of Leysen. He describes this incredibly treacherous path narrow, supported by iron staples over a sheer drop.
Right, with a bending plank requiring you to crouch with no handhold. Sounds terrifying.
Totally. And the first time he crossed it, he was led across shamefacedly, just muttering, damn, under his breath.
You can feel his internal struggle in his own notes. Not a good head, not well, the setting sun making it worse, the good chance of getting killed. He's really agonizing.
But then, right in that moment of intense fear, a sudden realization hits him, described like a white light.
Mhm.
Better to get killed than go away defeated.
And what's so striking is the immediate transformation. On the return trip, he crosses swiftly, easily, with what White calls a temperate recklessness.
Yeah, even doing the most dangerous bit gaily.
It wasn't that the fear just vanished, but that he chose defiance over being controlled by it.
Oh.
That seems to be the core insight here, the power of choosing your response to fear, even when you're still feeling it.
He also noted that strange paradox of fear around airplanes, feeling this visceral fear before getting, delaying flights, but then feeling little or no fear while flying, even during crashes, apparently.
Uh.
He just described it as oddity, astonishment, seeing a cold blue light, very detached.
He connects this back to a broader idea. Fear as a misfit instinct. It's overwhelming when you're isolated, but people find comfort, a sustaining confidence of the herd in crowds.
Right, and he uses that stark example of raw soldiers bunching together under fire, getting mowed down in swaths, precisely because that's the only way they can maintain courage. The group offers this false sense of safety, but it actually leads to destruction.
And that early intellectual hardihood White mentioned also shows up pretty forcefully. He developed what's described as a Shelley-like atheistical republicanism, quite radical for the time.
Oh, definitely. And this put him in direct conflict with his history master, a man named Roddles, who challenged conventional beliefs and quoted that line about the fool who hath said in his heart there is no God.
And his friend Prothero introduced doubt, but Benham, with this fierce sincerity pushed it on to denial. He didn't just question, he rejected.
White recalls this incredibly dramatic moment in the dormitory during a thunderstorm when another schoolmate, Latham, actually challenged Benham to deny his maker right then and there. Yeah, a very public, almost performative act of intellectual rebellion, really setting himself apart.
So even from a young age, Benham is wrestling with these powerful forces, physical fear, intellectual convention, and showing this fierce urge towards defiance and overcoming limitations, both internal and external.
And as White pieces it together, these early battles with fear and conformity directly connect to his later philosophical journey. It's like overcoming personal fear was preparation for facing the deeper anxieties of society and existence.
This becomes especially clear when he comes into a significant inheritance, an unconditional 6,000 a year, which was a fortune.
A massive fortune. But White points out the twinge of conscientious doubt Benham felt and the unspeakable riddle of its origins, hinting at some connection to a figure named Nolan, though the papers don't really elaborate.
So suddenly he has the world at his feet.
Exactly. And his initial reaction to London is almost romantic, isn't it? He explores maps, feels the romance of industry, sees the beauty of the great chimneys, the lurid shuddering flares. He's drawn in.
But that enchantment, it sours pretty quickly. He feels stifled by the sheer power of every day, the routine personified by his valet, Merkel. He felt mounted on the maid horse of civilization, just going through these motions that weren't really his own.
And the distractions are immense. All the social engagements, entertainments, hangers-on, hunting, and particularly his relationship with Mrs. Skelmersdale, described as a siren. This whole conventional upper-class life felt like an interminable Bond Street, lit up by night lamps, desolate, full of rubbish, full of the very best rubbish, just empty, you know?
It's in this state of boredom and, well, disillusionment that his core question erupts. What are we up to with life? What are we making of life?
Yeah, a real cry from the heart. He remembers his youthful project for a great world state sustained by an aristocracy of noble men, and now it just feels unlit and dead compared to this aimless existence.
He identifies this as the sin of waste. His London life felt like one piece of total waste of his potential.
And he argues, almost perversely, that his intrigue with Mrs. Skelmersdale, though reprehensible in conventional terms, was still superior to other forms of idleness because it does at least bear its proper label, meaning it gave him a saving crisis of the nerves. At least it had a clear, even if negative point, unlike the general aimlessness of parties and hunting and just drifting.
That realization drives this urgent decision to escape London, dominated by the need to get away from this muddle. And a walking tour on the Downs becomes this deliberate space for clarity.
And on the Downs, he has this really powerful realization. He sees men exercising horses, clearly not troubled by these abstract questions of purpose that are consuming him.
Right.
And Benham feels he is free to wander and think. Simply because those men down there were not free, he was spending their leisure.
That's a key insight. It brings back an idea he'd apparently discussed with Prothero. Riches oblige, the obligation that comes with wealth and privilege.
Exactly. His freedom wasn't just personal liberty. It was bought by others' labor, creating this profound duty to use it meaningfully.
This crystallizes his burning question, what work am I going to do? He believes this is the only question for the aristocrat.
Right. Amusement, he feels, is for the footman on holiday, or the tired invalid, not for the able-bodied man with means and potential. That's not what life is for him.
And his conclusion about conventional expectations is really key here. He felt he couldn't look to established men for guidance because their decisions were notoriously in conflict. They didn't offer a clear path.
So he concluded he had to take a presumptuous line, essentially forge his own path, because for him, there was no other tolerable line possible. He had to figure it out himself.
And this quest for his work, this drive to forge his own path outside of convention, inevitably created, well, major complications in his relationships.
Oh, definitely. His family relationships, as White notes, were particularly strained. His father, a schoolmaster, sounds like a man focused on appearances, keeping up things that might otherwise give way, using this very formal and sonorous speech.
He hinted at fine things, honor, high aims, nobilities, but couldn't seem to embody them himself. White describes it like a treasure that had got very dusty in an attic.
Yeah, that's a poignant image. And White describes a detail later. Just before Benham leaves for India, his father is totally preoccupied with some trivial dispute about the heuristic method in a school newspaper. He's just unable to truly connect with his son on a deeper level.
And his mother, Lady Moraine, she initially idealized Benham, but later became preoccupied, involved with this Nolan character, and a desire for the forests of Brazil, eventually leaving the family and remarrying.
She was very socially driven, viewing her son as a potential proconsul, empire builder, even prime minister, these very conventional markers of success.
And she saw his moral stiffness, his questioning nature, as a frustrating weakness, a stumbling, an elaboration, a spoil sport that was just hindering his conventional success.
White really highlights her need for things to be stated and explained in conventional terms. She tries to control Benham, cross-examining him after his walk, simply not believing he went alone.
It was just impossible, White notes, for Benham to explain his sudden shift away from that conventional life to people like Mrs. Skelmersdale or his mother, who were so rooted in expected behaviors they couldn't compute it.
And Lady Moraine's later violent quarrel with Amanda is so revealing. She blurts out the truth about Amanda's father being a swindler involved in the Marlborough Building Society fraud.
Ouch.
Yeah, but instead of offering any understanding, she blames Benham for his troubles, calls him a cuckold, and remains completely fixated on the financial implications. It's all about appearances and money for her.
His friendship with Prothero also evolves quite significantly over time. Prothero shared that critical eye early on for the indolences of their masters and the shriveled absurdity of vulgar theology.
Right, but Benham saw a risk of Prothero maybe falling into a coarsely conceived Epicureanism, just kind of giving up on the higher ideals. Benham even physically saved him from a dangerous prank at Cambridge.
Initially, Prothero seems to just participate but excuse Benham's rather aimless London life. He goes along with it.
But then, after Benham's serious equestrian accident, Prothero surprisingly agrees with Benham's burgeoning theory of aristocracy, based on the habit of pride, telling Benham he thinks he has the grit to try and live high. He sees something in Benham's struggle.
Tragically, though, Prothero later drops out of Benham's life after a parting laugh in Russia, just vanishes from his world.
And Benham expresses this deep, lasting regret over not sending dollars to Prothero later on, believing this failure actually contributed to deaths, feeling he ultimately failed his friend in a crucial way. It weighs on him heavily.
And finally, there's the incredibly complex relationship with Amanda, which is really central to White's account. Benham initially idealizes her as a freest, finest, bravest spirit, someone with a glorious sort of inhumanity, like Plato's guardians.
Yeah, he even quotes her phrase, sharp knives cutting through life. He sees her as this force of nature.
Their honeymoon starts as this planned world exploration, but quickly becomes just a prolonged and very picturesque tour of pleasure, where they are ardently delighted with the discovery of one another.
But Benham admits, later, suppressing the realization that for her it was just an impulsive pleasure hunt, not part of some grander scheme like his.
He becomes increasingly restless during this time, acutely sensitive to reminders of the great world process going on, while he felt he was playing no part, flinging coins at beggars and calling things accursed things in his frustration.
The major conflict erupts over where to live. Amanda wants to take a house, strike a note, capture London, be felt there. She argues they need to live in the world to change it.
But Benham resists. He wants to go where I can see into the things that hold the world together. He feels she has not the remotest idea of what I am after, fundamentally.
And Amanda insists it's the privilege and duty of the female to choose the lair. It's this fundamental clash between his internal surging path and her drive for external impact and, well, a kind of conventional domesticity, albeit a glamorous one.
Benham also notes the multitude of other Amandas that started to surface, traits that roused him to opposition. She was conquering, sharp about money, greedy, restless, calculating, especially regarding his mother.
He explicitly fights against jealousy, seeing it as a vice of the hovel, fearing that this veil of delusion he had about her would inevitably lead to disillusionment. He's aware of the idealization.
The return to England after hearing of her affair with Sir Philip Easton leads to that incredibly dramatic confrontation White recounts. Benham stands white-faced and inexpressive at the top of the stairs as Amanda and Easton say goodnight.
And Easton calls her my wonderful goddess. Just pure melodrama.
Amanda's reaction is described as a mix of crying, initial refusal of divorce, and questioning Benham's sudden return after long months.
Benham just states he wants to help them marry and get away from you. He's detached, almost surgical.
But Amanda insists divorce is complex and wants to talk alone, telling Easton to go, my dear Pip, taking control of the situation.
And the aftermath reveals the depth of Benham's turmoil beneath that composed exterior. White describes a violent outburst alone in the hotel room, a torn sheet, smashed clock and mirrors, blood splashes, all reported by the head chambermaid.
Wow, so it wasn't detachment at all. It was suppressed rage and pain.
Exactly. A raw physical expression of the pain from this profound failure in personal connection.
And these personal and relational turbulences are set against the backdrop of Benham's extensive travels. These weren't just vacations, were they? They were explicitly part of his research magnificent.
Yeah, absolutely. Encounters with the collective life of the world in its raw, often disordered state. He was gathering data, in a way.
He describes seeing civilization in defeat in places like the Adriatic coast, Pola, Zara, Spalato, Salona. Ruins of past greatness standing over this weak provincial life, marked by violence, dishonesty, unstable rule.
In his journey into actual lawlessness in Montenegro, Albania, Macedonia, despite all the warnings, was a deliberate challenge to his spirit. He recounts sleeping in rough khans on shelves, days filled with nightmares, but just this refusal to turn back.
He heard stories of robbers and assassination, the warning to go unarmed.
And then he witnessed the devastating reality of a vendetta, the heart-rending screams finding the man's head and body separately, the keening wife and aunts, the rain stopping their journey. It's such a visceral image of pure, uncontained human conflict.
He even found a village of the dead, a man with no face, bodies in doorways, 6 men laid out in a row, and that chilling detail of a village without dogs, implying everyone, even the animals, were gone.
These experiences were concrete, brutal examples of the disorder his research sought to understand, not abstract problems, but real horror.
This perhaps sheds some light on his extreme reaction in that dog shooting incident near Okrida, charged by these large, savage dogs, perceiving the goat herd's indolent malice.
Benham's facile exasperation, as White calls it, just boils over. He shoots the dogs, declaring, "Tired to death of dogs, all savage dogs must be shot."
It's a moment of his inner frustration with disorder boiling into sudden, violent action.
Yeah, and Amanda is there and adds that clarifying condition, unless they are good dogs, which Benham accepts, unless they're good dogs to everyone. But the incident escalates, there's return fire from the goat herd and his companion Giorgio, and they have to make a hurried escape.
His observations in Russia, too, highlighted the sense of disorder. He saw St. Petersburg as like a savage, untamed London, an aristocratic land riddled with internal conflict and an intolerable stress that laid bare these elemental facts about society and human nature.
And in Haiti, visiting Christophe's citadel, Sanssouci, he saw it as an embodiment of tyranny and the transitoriness of such glories.
But his insight there was interesting, that tyranny doesn't just come from a ruler's pride, but from the universal docility and unkingliness of men who actually want kingly guidance. They enable it.
And his hastiness, that quick temper when confronted with perceived injustice, led to direct active intervention in Haitian streets, hitting a policeman who was clubbing someone.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, required consular help to smooth things over. Again, the inner drive reacting forcefully, maybe impulsively, to external disorder.
India presented a different kind of disorder for him. While he was attracted to the intellect he found there and repelled by the brutality, he was utterly infuriated by the spirit of caste. He saw no India, but a great number of Indias, and each goes about with its chin in the air.
And his facile exasperation at any defiance of his deep-felt desire for human brotherhood caused these trivial incidents to escalate dramatically. A row with a civil servant over a first-class train compartment, and a disgraceful fracas with a holy man in Benares who threw away food because Benham's shadow touched it. Benham's reaction, calling him an unendurable snob, and then forcefully insisting that he would eat the food.
He wasn't exactly blending in, was he?
Not remotely. He even tried intellectual intervention in Russia, talking to a Jewish apologist about land ownership and the feelings of the host population, urging brotherhood and mercy. But his complex ideas weren't fully understood, as he notes, I'm not sure if they quite followed by German.
And White sets the Rand outbreak in Johannesburg in 1913 as the backdrop for Benham's final conversations. Observing the riot, the strangely meticulously careful strikers, the crowds of onlookers, the sudden shooting outside the Rand Club, the death in the street.
White sees the raw human disorder in it all, but Benham, characteristically, views it almost as a distraction, a hitch in the machinery next to his own large preoccupation.
Even amidst this chaos, he's still focused on the larger, more abstract patterns of disorder and his own internal quest.
Exactly. And as White sifts through Benham's papers, he really notes their disorder, their overlapping, contradictory. It's not a polished system at all. It reflects the lack of systematic revision. He even mentions the second limitation, which was originally labeled sex, being scratched out a glimpse into the raw, messy process.
This messiness shows the evolving nature of Benham's central idea, aristocracy. It began, didn't it, stemming from that shame at childhood cowardice.
Right, and it evolved into the conviction that there is no honor nor pride for a man until he refers his life to ends and purposes beyond himself. This new aristocrat must be both loyal and lucid, clear thinking.
And this lucidity leads to a profound rejection, the repudiation of all existing states and kings. He envisions instead a great world republic, an unseen kingship ruling the whole globe, which he calls the King Invisible.
It's really important to understand that by king invisible, he doesn't mean a literal monarch or even, a god exactly. It's more an allegiance to an ideal, the Lord of truth and all sane loyalty.
So that's the guiding star.
That's the guiding star, the link of our order, the new knighthood, the new aristocracy.
And this unique aristocracy, it can't have organization because, in Benham's view, organization's corrupt. Nor can it have recognition. They can only speak plainly.
White interprets this radical idea as meaning essentially revolution, an open conspiracy. It explicitly denies conventional state symbols, the king upon the stamps and the flag upon the wall, because their loyalty is solely to the Republic of Mankind, not to national governments as they currently exist. It's a global intellectual allegiance.
Benham himself wrestles with the idea of priggishness, doesn't he? He worries that his abstract devotion makes him a trifle inhuman, rather rhetorical and forced.
Yes, he has this moment of realization, particularly after Prothero's death, that he's been a prig as regards him and then as regards Amanda and my mother and everyone. He sees it.
But how does he reconcile that?
Well, he frames it as a necessary, unavoidable priggishness, something required for pioneers who are so concentrated and specialized in interest as to be a trifle inhuman, often doing things clumsily because they're forging a completely new path. They haven't figured out the smooth way yet.
He sees himself as an overstrong man, pursuing one idea, harshly and continuously, often blundering through fences, lacking that natural ease.
And this leads to his confessions of failure, failing Prothero by not sending the money, failing his wife, failing others. He feels raw with remorse.
But despite all the suffering he's caused and experienced, he insists life is imperfect. Nothing can be done perfectly. Blunders are accidents, and the world isn't accident-proof.
Right. He feels he must stick to the way I have taken because despite the flaws and the pain, it's the right way for him. It's his work.
He contrasts his vision of the cleanness of life found in this difficult pursuit with Prothero's perhaps more cynical, self-defeating stance. While I perish, I say good things.
Yet Benham rejects that. His core faith remains his conviction that he has found something clear, something better worth going on with than any adventure or personal relationship could possibly be. It's this larger impersonal quest that ultimately sustains him through all the personal failures.
And his final desire, as seen in his notes, is to tell the world what he has learned, to somehow make a book from this massive notes about his search for the life that is worthwhile living.
It's a call to others who might feel like self-appointed aristocrats. In his sense, those seeking purpose beyond the conventional, that they must speak to one another, find connection in that short quest.
So as we finish sifting through Benham's research magnificent through White's eyes, what do we really make of it? It certainly wasn't a tidy academic study, was it? It was a turbulent life, lived intensely, full of these deep internal struggles and pretty dramatic external clashes.
He was clearly a man fundamentally driven by, well, a fear of baseness, a burning desire for honor, and this evolving, profoundly radical vision of what true purpose and aristocracy could mean in a world he saw as just filled with planless, indeterminate lives.
From literally facing down tigers in childhood to grappling with the figurative tigers of societal expectation, personal desire, and global disorder, Benham's journey was this constant, often messy push towards something he defined as noble, even when it meant failure, conflict, and, yes, being perceived as a prig.
And his quest for the King Invisible, this allegiance to truth and reason and the Republic of Mankind, was his attempt to find a fixed guiding star beyond the chaos and conventionality he observed both in the world around him and, frankly, within himself.
He ultimately concludes, it seems, that despite all his blunders and the pain caused, the impersonal thing goes on, the larger spirit of the race moving, however clumsily, towards light and comprehension. His individual imperfections didn't invalidate the larger, worthy quest for him.
Benham's story, as compiled by White, Really leaves you with a challenging thought, doesn't it? In a world that feels increasingly complex and maybe disorderly,
Mm.
are you simply letting things happen, living a kind of muddled, indeterminate life, just adrift in the currents?
Or, like Benham, are you actively wrestling with fear, defining what work is yours to do, and trying to stick to that chosen path, even when it's uncomfortable, imperfect, and causes you inevitably to blunder along the way?